Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. It's been quite a while since I've done an official booktube tag. Despite having bookmarked a ton of really creative book tags, some of which I've been tagged in and some not, today I finally sat down to film one and chose Mike's excellent Confessions of a Book Collector, partly because I've been tagged a few times, definitely by Pat at Book Chat with Pat and Robert G., reader of books. And recently the tag came to mind again when I saw Greg's wonderful take over on Another Bibliophile Reads. And then a certain book critic encouraged me to do it as well. Let's get straight to the tag discussion. It starts with some prompts. First, I own more books than I can realistically read. Yes, I think so. Yes, I think I do have a few more than necessary. I joked at the start of the COVID pandemic that I was relieved to have enough volumes to keep not only me, but my entire neighborhood in reading material through a coming apocalypse, if necessary. And I read a lot of books not on my shelves yet, too. I have an e-reader filled with books from my library's Libby app, from NetGalley, and from publishers, as well as from sites like Project Gutenberg, as well as digital books that friends have shared with me. But I have not bought more than 4 or 5 digital books in the entire 2 decades or so that I've been reading on an e-reader. I just use it for these free books. In addition, I regularly visit 3 different local public libraries and routinely borrow books. I pass several little free libraries on all of my regular walking routes, and I sometimes go shopping in new and used bookstores in the Metro DC area, as well as when I travel. Still, there is something different about most of the books that live permanently on my shelves from the books I usually pick up at these libraries and stores. We'll get to that. The next prompt. I bought books just because they were beautiful. I had definitely not done that until very recently. For decades, I chose my books by what I wanted to read. If there were several different editions, I would choose by who wrote the introduction or simply by the better price. And then, if it was still basically equal, I would choose a book published in the same series. For example, if I was looking at a specific author and I already owned a couple of that author's works as Penguins or Oxfords or Vintage International, I would stay in that pattern. The last thing I would consider, if there were still choices remaining, would be which had the prettier cover. Recently, I bought a few books from the UK through Blackwell's, usually because they were released earlier than the American copy would be, or because it was cheaper, but occasionally I bought them because I preferred the UK cover. And then there is the most visible double-width bookshelf in my front room, which in the past few months has gotten quite an upgrade visually. For years, the lower shelves held library books on one side and homeschooling books on the other. Then above that, I had some favorite knitting books, some academic history books written by my friends and my father and me, etc. But not too long ago, I specifically bought some lovely editions of books I adore or that I see as important to me in some way. And I cleaned off all those other books and shelved them in a new place. And then I found some other books that were shelved in a variety of spots throughout my study that I decided sort of belonged together. And I put those on those front room shelves too. I'll talk more about that second part a bit later. But even for the lovely editions, I wasn't simply buying them because they were beautiful. I was buying them because I loved the books and found these editions to be much more long-lasting than the old paperbacks that I owned. But yes, I also love the way they look, all lined up together on my shelves. I've never done a home library tour on this channel before, although I did do a very brief visual run-through years ago, which I will link to in the description box. Would y'all like to see a little tour of my books? I might not film it until January or so at the earliest. On to the next prompt. Finding a great book is sometimes more exciting than reading it. Well, nothing is more exciting than reading a new book, but I definitely do get excited when I find books at used bookstores that I'm not expecting. Either something that fills a hole in my collection that I'm eager to fill, or something I didn't even know about. The latter is often work of literary analysis or sometimes a biography of a favorite author, but sometimes it's the published diary by some favorite author, or perhaps a collection of letters that I had no idea existed. Okay, on to the next one. Quote, I've bought duplicates by accident or because I liked a different edition. Once or twice I've accidentally bought a duplicate. And there were also a couple of times when David and I were both reading a book at the same time and snapped up a second copy when we found it in a little free library or something like that. And often I've acquired a different edition if it had a substantive introductory essay that I really wanted, or if it was an annotated edition of some sort. I like prompt number 5. I sometimes rearrange my shelves for fun. Most of the time, I shelve my fiction in a way that makes sense to me, but isn't the norm. First, I start by region of the world. British is together, fiction from the U.S. South is together, French, etc. Within these categories, I shelve by time period. So Victorian British lit is all together, for example, or 20th century Southern lit. Then, within that subcategory, I shelve particular authors, more or less in chronological order of the time in which they wrote. And then, within the books by each author, I try to put them in the order in which they're published. This gives me a great feel for the general sweep of literature, with both time and place as key markers of the kinds of features that we might notice when we read. I love being reminded of that kind of historical context of what I'm reading. By far, my largest collections of fiction are American and British. And here is one true oddity to my adherence to this regional time organization style, which has been true for so long that it now seems natural to me. I put biographies and literary criticism about British authors all together in a different set of bookcases. But I shelve that kind of secondary material about American authors immediately alongside the American fiction. It makes no sense. Although I think it initially started because I had so much more criticism of American authors, and especially Southern authors. There are a few authors that I read regularly that have big sections of their own. Eudora Welty, Emily Dickinson, Sarah Orne Jewett, etc. Welty, I think, might get the most shelf space in my library. 2 shelves are devoted to her own nonfiction as well as nonfiction about her. And in a different room, Welty's novels and short stories take up half of another shelf, where they sit alongside Catherine Ann Porter, William Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, Carson McCullers, etc. And in that bookcase, there is secondary material about all those other Southern writers shelved with their fiction. Now, because I am I hesitate to say that I'm obsessive-compulsive about the order of my books, but for 2 reasons. One, it's an official diagnosis that I don't think I meet at all. And secondly, my books are, as you have heard, not ordered nearly as strictly or consistently as what that plan makes it sound. But still, because I really like to have my books basically in this place and time order, I've never put books all from one publisher together before until this year. I mentioned earlier that I filled the shelves in my front room with books that I love and with books that are aesthetically pleasing. That double bookcase I was filling has a small shelf in the center, almost exactly the height of a typical paperback, which won't fit hardbacks unless they're lying on their sides. So eventually, I decided to fill it up with books from one publisher to preserve the cohesive look that the upper and lower shelves have. At first, I thought I would fill it with Penguin classics, but Craig's gorgeous shelves of NYRBs all lined up next to each other on his stunning shelves in his home library convinced me to try something else. I pulled out almost all of my NYRBs from their places where they logically sat on the various shelves in my study and arranged them alphabetically on that small middle shelf. And gosh, they are beautiful. And that shifting around was just purely for fun and for looks. I'm not 100% sure that I'll keep them where they are. We'll see. But I think I might. It gives me a lot of pleasure, actually, even though I was initially concerned that it might make me a bit anxious to now have those authors without their real-life friends. On to the next prompt. There are books I'll probably never read, but I'll never get rid of them. I think the answer here might be yes. There are books that I haven't read that have been there for a long time, but all of them are books that I wish I had already read. I'll use the Dickens collection as an example. Way back when Borders was closing its stores nationwide, they discounted their books by an enormous amount at the end. I was at an age and stage in my life when I knew it was unlikely we would be moving again anytime soon, so I bought Penguin copies for about $2 a piece of basically all of Dickens, and individual Folger pocket-sized copies of Shakespeare for $1 a piece, I think, an author that my young son was falling in love with right then. Those Shakespeares saw a lot of use. But I have to admit that I just never have loved Dickens. I thought that all those pretty volumes would start me on a deep dive that might change my mind. But they still haven't, mostly because I still really haven't started that deep dive. I will say here that while I have quite a number of books that I haven't yet read, I will not keep already read books on my shelf unless I think there is an astounding chance that I will use that book again. Just because I read it, even if I very much enjoyed it, I will not keep it on my shelves unless I think I might either reread it or refer back to it when working on something or studying something. The idea of filling my house with books that I've already finished with doesn't appeal to me at all, although I know many people love to look at their shelves and see all they've accomplished. I much prefer to look at my shelves and see all of the possibilities for new reads, but also rereads and reassessments. The next prompt, quote, I bought books simply because they were a bargain. I think I can get away with saying that the answer here is no. I never buy books simply because it's a bargain. It has to be something that I want to read, or at least consult fairly heavily. Occasionally, I suppose, I'll pick up a nature memoir of a quiet place, even if I've never heard of the book before, if it's in a little free library or remainder section or something. Maybe that would count. The final prompt is, I like the idea of having certain books, even if I don't plan to read them soon. Yes, indeed. While I read a wide variety of books, I fill my shelves with canonical literature in general. I purchase those rather than just borrow them because I know they will still be relevant in some way to me, even decades from now. There are a few books I hold on to because they were very special to my husband in the years before he died, that I might not have kept if it were not for his deeper love of them. I suspect I'll keep them forever, or pass them along to our son at some point when he has a home of his own filled with bookcases. And I hope he will have those bookcases. Right now, this room where I usually film is my son's old bedroom, and half the bookcases in here are filled with old books of his, especially books about Shakespeare, and books of Greek and Roman literature, and stuff in and about Old English, which he studied in college as his second foreign language, etc. I love having them here, and I definitely pore over them, especially during September, and then also at times like this, when it's handy to have access to a whole shelf of various translations of the Odyssey. But I'm sure it will be handy to fill those shelves with some of my own books currently stored in a couple of boxes in the corner of my study. The last Part of the tag is a pair of questions. What's one confession you have as a book collector? What's something that you do that you think other collectors would understand? I am a bit of a completist sometimes. If I have all but one of the novels of a Victorian author, I'm going to be quite interested in adding that last one to my shelves. Similarly, I have an extensive collection of works, as I said, about Welty and Dickinson, and if I hear that some new biography or literary analysis is about to be published, I am very likely to start saving my pennies. Partly because I'll really want to read it, but honestly also because it just belongs on that shelf. At least in the abstract, I do not like this completist streak in me. But as long as I can keep it under control, limited basically to just a couple of authors, I'm basically okay with it. Well, that will do it for today. Thank you, Mike, for creating this great tag, and thanks to all of the people who tagged me, and thanks to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.